So, good evening, everyone. So tonight I'll be speaking about a ship that has recently, let's say, resurfaced and gained a bit of fame in the Port Elizabeth community because of some rubber bales that washed ashore a couple of weeks ago. And that is the mystery of the S.S Helmspey. So this presentation is split into four parts. The first one will deal with the Helmspey herself. The next part will deal with the fallen from the Helmspey. Then we'll quickly look at the U-boat that sunk her. And finally, we will deal with the rubber bales that washed ashore. So, before I do get started, I must say there is hardly any information about the Helmspey out there. So I tried to gather as much of the information that was available. So the Helmspey was a British freighter built in 1931 by Thomson, Joseph L. and Sons of the Sunderland in Great Britain. And it was a British shipbuilding company, and the Helmspey was owned by Evans and Reed. And she was made from steel weighing about 4,764 tons, and her dimensions was about 122.2 to 16.6 by 7.6 meters. And she had a power of about 424 nominal horsepower with a speed of about 10 knots. And that speed, which we'll get to in a minute, is one of the reasons why she was so easily sunk by U-516. And at the time of her sinking, she was captained by a man called Harry Jones, who ended up surviving the sinking. So here is about where she sunk. She sank about 11 miles south of the coast of Cape St. Francis. So it's still quite a long way from shore. And the survivors of the Helmspey were all rescued by the South African Air Force when they heard about her sinking. Now, the following text comes from Thomas Emlyn Price, who was a survivor on the Helmspey, and he was 17 years old when he joined the Mercantile Marine as an apprentice deck officer. So that means the Helmspey was a privately owned ship that the British government had in its fleet. And he wrote the following a couple of years after the sinking. You ask for a record of the events from my point of view, and the following is the best I can do after all these years. The SS Helmspey had been out from the UK approximately 9 months and was homebound at the time of the sinking. The majority of her cargo consisted of manganese ore and bales of raw rubber loaded at various Asiatic ports. The length of the voyage and nature of these ports caused the ship's bottom to be quite fouled, with corresponding loss of speed, and this possibly contributed to her sinking. On leaving East London in South Africa, after taking on oil bunkers, she was found too slow for coastal convoys and was independently routed to Cape Town for inclusion in a slower UK-bound convoy. At the time of her sinking, I was asleep in my cabin on the starboard side, just abaft of the number 2 cargo hold, where the first torpedo struck on the port side of that hold. It is hard to believe now, but I slept through that explosion, and it was necessary for able seaman running to his boat station to shake me awake through an open porthole. Youth is a marvelous thing. At this stage, the vessel had slight list port, but there was no danger of sinking. Engines were stopped, the crew ordered to abandon ship, and both port and starboard main lifeboats were lowered into the water. The port lifeboat was directed to stay alongside and wait for the arrival of the captain and first officer, who were making a damage inspection of the ship. During this period, the second torpedo struck the port side of the engine room and directly under the port lifeboat, which was still alongside. All loss of life and injuries were amongst the crew in this lifeboat. The captain and first officer were blown from the main deck into the forward well deck. Luckily, this was partly full of water and they were not injured. Our starboard lifeboat picked up the survivors from the water, and approximately 4 hours later, a South African Air Force rescued us and launching our SOS. While awaiting this launch, we watched our vessel break its back and sink in what seemed like an agonizing length of time. This was extremely sad to me, as I had served 3 months on her as a cadet. We were taken into Port Elizabeth and spent about 3 months there before being sent back to the UK. In retrospect, it is my considered opinion that this vessel should not have been lost. Being as we were so close to the coast, I feel sure that if we had kept away on the ship and turned to starboard, we would have avoided the second torpedo and run aground. Of course, it's so easy to surmise these things afterwards, but a totally different situation at the time. And of the 45 men on board, 4 men died in the sinking, while a 5th died the following day in a PE hospital. The fallen are 3rd Engineer Officer Thomas Frederick Robson, aged 33, Able Seaman Leslie Sanderson, aged 22, and Able Seaman William Watson, aged 27. And as you can see, their names are inscribed on the Tower Hill Memorial. Now, the next 2 are buried in the South End Cemetery in Port Elizabeth. Unfortunately, due to the absolute no care given to the Muslim section of the cemetery, Grisa Abdul Muhammad's exact grave will forever be lost. He also lost his life on the sinking of the ship. Now, the next man is Assistant Steward Thomas Edge, aged 31. And he was the man that died the following day in a PE hospital. And his grave is still very much intact and is in section Q of the old section of the graveyard in grave 111. And I discovered his grave during the poppy run last year in November. And it's for those that want to visit his grave, it's somewhere behind that big brown dome structure when you enter the cemetery and look to your left. So those are the fallen of the Helmspey. So what happened to U-516 after this sinking? Well, the Helmspey was sunk while it was on its 2nd patrol, and after that particular patrol, she had 6 more patrols in South America, the Caribbean, and in Norway. And she surrendered at Loch Eriboll on 14 May 1945 and was then transferred to Lishalli in Northern Ireland for Operation Deadlight, the scuttling of all German U-boats that surrendered to Allied forces. And she was sunk on 2nd of January 1946. And I went on to the U-boat website where all the ships that were sunk by all German U-boats was listed, and U-516 alone was responsible for 1 ship damaged, and 16 being sunk, and that resulted in a total death of 186 men. And with that being said, let's move on to some recent events, the rubber bales. So on the 22nd of September, this Facebook post um, made the rounds about some rubber bales washing ashore in Cape Recife. And people were very interested in it, but it was when it landed in Skunies at the tanks that people really started to get interested in it. And it is thanks to Mike Klee that we know these rubber bales most likely come from the S.S Helmspey. And here we have a list of all the cargo on it. 2,772 tons of tea, 2,000 tons of manganese ore, 1,457 tons of rubber, and 464 tons of general cargo. Um, the next image has a couple of images that I found on Facebook, and these are all pictures of the rubber bales that washed ashore in Cape Recife, in Blue Water Bay, and all around the coast of Port Elizabeth. And I believe the top left image, can't remember exactly what the name is, but that is the name of the capital city of the then Ceylon, which was where the Helmspey um, came from at when she was sunk off the coast of Cape Recife. Now, for those that have had the opportunity to go down to the beaches and visit these rubber bales will know that they aren't small, they are quite large, and they absolutely reek. Not only for being underwater for 80 years, but the amount of sunlight this rubber has received in the days after it washed ashore. Now, on the Monday after there was a screenshot sent onto the SAMHSEC WhatsApp group, I went down to the tanks at Skumakerskop and decided to cut off some samples with a Leatherman to show off in my history class at university. And here we have those two images of the rubber. And you can clearly see the different types of raw rubber that the ship was carrying at the time of her sinking. And that's the end of the rediscovering of the SS Helmspey through the recently washed ashore rubber bales.